The next thing is to read from Luke 14, chapters 1 through 14. The Pharisees in this laid a trap for Jesus. Well, the trap backfired on them badly. And on one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. Just then, in front of him, there was a man who had dropsy. And Jesus asked the lawyers and Pharisees, "Is it lawful to cure people on the Sabbath or not?" But they were silent. So Jesus took him and healed him and sent him on his way. Then he said to them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that has fallen into a well, will you not immediately pull it out on a Sabbath day?" And they could not reply to this. When he noticed how the guests chose the place of honor, he told them a parable. When you're invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down in the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come to you and say, "Give this person you a place." And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." That ends the reading.
Good morning. I don't know if you know, but there is a pretty heavy rubber mallet in the pulpit. It's down with some cans of paint, but I'm going to stand here, okay? You seem nice enough. First, I want to say thank you, and I want to say thank you to Wendy. If you know anything about church, there are 3 people that keep the church running. The first is the office coordinator. Is Nancy in the house? No? So I would like all of you to stop by this week and give Nancy a hug and say thank you to her for being so gracious to me and also getting all the stuff done that she gets done. So even if you don't like Nancy, I would like for you to stop by and give her a hug, please. And just grow up about the not liking part, right? The second thing I would like to say, and the second person who props up the church, is the music coordinator, pianist, musician folks. So Lee was here. That is weird. Thank you to Lee, and thank you to John, and thank you to others for music. Without beautiful music, all that's left is the spoken word, and we know how boring that can be. And thank you. Thank you. I knew this pew was going to be trouble when I walked in, so And the third person is the associate pastor, the pastor who works with children and families, the pastor who supports the church school teachers, the pastor who figures out rides for people. And someone decorated these beautiful boxes around the campus of the church for food donations. So whoever helped Wendy do that, you probably found that person. Sylvia, sorry. I'm old, near death, sorry. That's good. Call the person that you're thanking the wrong name. That's a good move. So Sylvia probably helped find that person. So thank you to Sylvia for all of her work. And I understand that you had an interim for a good period of time. And it's challenging to work with an interim. So thanks to all of you for doing that work, as well as Sylvia, who is not named Wendy. So thanks. I think that's my time. I want to thank you for putting up with a picture of my head, which is about 10 or 15 feet tall, which is just, my wife found this both humorous and frightening for all of you. So, and she loves me and married me, so there you go. It's a great pleasure to be with you in person. I normally come to Manhattan Beach to see my sister-in-law and her family, and they live on 19th and some other street within sort of spitting distance of a park that's down there, and it's lovely, but I don't get out much, so I actually haven't been to this church, and it's lovely. And the welcome signs were lovely, and folks have been very kind, so thanks for that. So this text is intentionally set in a couple of places, but the one I would draw your attention to is the wedding banquet. A wedding banquet is a very personal, very strong sort of family connection time. Weddings can also be full of speeches and sort of boring. In the first century Mediterranean basin, weddings carried on for a week or so, as they still do in some other cultures. So imagine that commitment to friends and family to be among others for at least a week to celebrate the couple. An intensely personal and familial gathering. Now, we all know that friends can sometimes turn away from us, that friendships can sometimes be wonderful and then problematic. We also know that family members can be wonderful and nurturing, and unfortunately, sometimes toxic and problematic. So if you have a problematic or toxic family relationship, I see you, I'm sorry about that. And I have one as well, so I feel that and have some experience with that. Put that together with a wedding gathering, and consider that the writers are comparing church or faith gathering to that personal, intense family and friend gathering. And the word comes, whether it's from Jesus' mouth, whether it's from the writers of the gospel, whether it's from some third or fourth source, doesn't really make any difference to us. We are asked to hear these words about that gathering. We are not to invite friends and relatives. We are to invite those who have less than we do. They rent instead of own. They drive a gas-powered car, woo, instead of an electric car, right? They are physically and mentally challenged, which means they cannot do or feel or experience some of the things that we do. And so we think of them and experience them as less than. The struggling and the lost. And before you say, I'm struggling and I'm lost, I want you to think of someone that you have helped recently, and that's what this text is talking about. Persons who are on the edge or have slipped over the edge, cannot pay their mortgage, cannot pay their rent, have had their car repossessed, have had to change medication 3 times because that's not working, and so they cannot walk, they cannot think straight, they cannot sleep, they cannot function in the workplace, and so they've been fired. Think of someone that you know who's in a difficult or challenging position, not yourself, but someone else who's worse off. The Irish, who are similar to the Welsh, say that if everyone were to throw their troubles into the middle of the street, give them a good looking over, we would all walk into the street, collect our own troubles, and take them back. I want you to think about someone who is worse off than you in any way. That's the struggling. And the lost, that could be any of us. We think that having more stuff makes us safer. We think that having a taller silo with more grain in it will protect us from illness and death. We think all kinds of kooky things because we were taught those things by our parents and by our culture and by our workplace and by the nice school that we went to. So maybe we're lost and maybe we're in the right place. This is the clear message in this text about how God works. This is God's kind of gathering. If you want shorthand for it, it's mostly not us. We have ourselves pretty well together. We have gifts that we offer. We are able to pay our bills. We are able to be kind and generous with others, usually our kids. I have a son who's 30 and a daughter who's 26. Usually the texts are about cash. Could you help with this? I need this deposit. And it was cute when they were younger, when they were in high school or college, because then it was 40 or 50 bucks, and now it's like 4,000 or 6,000 for this. Of course, the answer is always no. So let's be clear at least about the text. And the text says, the persons that make up the wedding banquet, the church, are to be the poor, those who have less than we do, the physically and mentally challenged, those who are on the edge in sort of keeping together something about their life and reality, the struggling, those who are over the edge, and the lost, those who have been sold a bill of goods and have trusted in it. Rather than trusting God, they trust everything else. What does this mean for the church? That's the part that we need to negotiate and argue about. For me, it means that the church needs to be noisier. The church needs to welcome disruption, questions, messiness, and then we need to cope by saying to each other, how are we going to have a worship experience? How are we going to have a church experience when we are inviting folks that are not like us? What does that look like? Well, I'm okay with pews. These are pretty comfortable. But these pews are going to get ink and crayon in them if we have too many kids. I see a little bit of wax here. Maybe from Christmas Eve. I don't know what this is. All right. Nick, do you do lab testing as well as sound work? I forgot to thank Nick. Nick says no thank you. All right. Your place looks great. The parking lot's clean. The gardening has been done. We had our house painted. I just looked at the paint job on the church. It's terrific. But what if the church were more like a public park? or a playground or even a public library, things need to be a little tough, easy to clean, right? Things need to be also safe. So there need to be places for us to ask for help. There need to be people who are minding who's coming in and out of the door. One of the things that you learn when you serve in an urban church is if it's not nailed down, it's going to walk. Why? Because God invites us to keep the doors open for prayer and for persons to come in and sit and for persons just to sleep in the back pew because it's cool, right? But they also sometimes go to the bathroom in the sanctuary where our church is, and they also take the candlesticks because, I don't know, maybe it'll be something of value, and the church ends up having more than they do. It's problematic. So our sanctuary looks sort of naked, and it smells sort of like a public school hallway because it's been cleaned with, I don't know what, hydrochloric acid or whatever you clean with, right? But we feel good about keeping the church open so that people can be in the sanctuary. But you all wouldn't enjoy sitting in there because it smells kind of funny and it's sort of naked, right? Anything of value and most things of beauty have been taken out. Why? Because we're trying to be open to the city of Pasadena. But if you lived in the city of Pasadena, you wouldn't come in the middle of the week because it smells like cleaning fluid, blah, blah. We need to find a way to care for each other and to worship and to welcome each other, and at the same time, widen our welcome in the church. My mother is 96 years old. Are any of you 96? 95? 94? Close. You are not close to 94. All right. Oh, some church members are. I was really close to calling him a liar. Wow. But there are some church members that are in their 90s, you're trying to tell me. Thank you. That's very welcoming. All right. In their hundreds. My mom insists on wearing gloves to church because that's what she was taught. I say, Mom, I'm a pastor. I have huge authority. Sylvia/Wendy knows that pastors have no authority, but you don't need to have gloves for God to love you, but it's how she learned to go to church. So I just don't mess with Mom's gloves. But I do tell her, you're going to weird people out if you wear gloves because they're going to think that they're supposed to wear gloves or there's something wrong in the sanctuary. Her church has 40 people. They all know each other, so they just ignore my mom's gloves. What if we thought of the church as an adaptive playground? My nephew is significantly differently abled. And so for him to go to the beach here in the town where he lives in, he has to have this wild sort of four-wheeler walker. And he has a special chair that he can use on the beach. And in order to do certain things, he has to have significant help. He's an adaptive skier, for example. What if the church were like an adaptive playground, which means the other kids get to play there as well, but there are some different possibilities for how you can use your body, how you can connect with the equipment? Well, you all have thought this through, and you welcome people in wheelchairs or who are differently abled. What if we widen that idea of adaptive playground to include persons who don't have any money for an offering? So everybody gets a chit, and if you don't have an offering to put in, you can put the chit in so that they feel okay about participating in the offering, right? It's weird, but it's also helpful for people who are considered less than. Michael Piazza is a writer, and several years ago he wrote a book. He was the founder of the Cathedral of Hope in Dallas, one of the now largest UCC congregations in the country. It used to be on its own, and then it joined the United Church of Christ. And in that book, Michael Piazza talks about church folk needing to take off their bib, needing to change from being a consumer, an eater, or someone who gets fed, and putting on their apron, someone who is a server, someone who comes to church ready to work. And you're thinking, you know what, it's COVID, today I'm tired, Mr. Big Head is now Shrunken Head, and he's not that interesting, I've had enough. I get it, I just had COVID for a couple weeks, it was a pain, right? But what if we thought about our adaptive community and thought about sitting in our car, and before we come in, we're ready only when we're ready to put our apron on. If we're in a bib sort of place, maybe we get to come in every once in a while, but church is a place where we serve, not a place where we hope everything is delivered to us and we are spoon-fed. I'm just asking you to consider that. I also want you to remember a time when you did something difficult, but you had someone next to you who made it nurturing, who made it a wonderful experience, even though you were doing a terrible thing. When I worked and lived in San Francisco, I was called upon as clergy to go in and clean out the apartment of someone who had jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and ended their life. It was a tragic situation. It was a painful day. It actually took a day and a half. And all I could think about at the beginning of that time was how difficult life had been for this person who had ended their life, and how each piece in their apartment, which was a beautiful apartment, had been touched by them, and now they were no longer around. I struggled with this, but I was asked to do this. I was asked to do it with 2 other church members, and I must say to you that those 2 church members taught me as a young clergy what it was like to be faithful by keeping me and keeping each other company during a really challenging day. As we packed up and separated items, as we cleaned out a fridge, as we cleaned a bathroom, and made the site available for social services and others to come in to do their work. We were carrying out our part as a church community. It was a horrible setting, one of the worst that I can imagine beyond war. And yet I was nurtured that day by these 2 other persons of faith who asked me about my life, who checked in with me about death in my own family, who asked questions about what it was like to be a part of a faith community for me, from my perspective. They asked me about my seminary education. I was sort of astounded by their ability to engage in a situation that really kept me speechless and my mind blank except for the tragedy. You have had that experience as well. And I wonder if that experience could be mostly what we experience at church. We say in Pasadena, because I'm old enough to now hope that I get fired, we say to our congregation, the city of Pasadena are the children of God. And so there's no interest on our part, my wife and myself, in checking out whether people believe in Jesus or not. You are welcome in our congregation, not because we're sloppy or because we don't get it or because we're desperate for money. We sold our building. And the secret of COVID is that people have gotten wealthy in the market. We started with $10 million 3 years ago, and we now have $15 million. And we've been giving away almost $500,000 a year. We can't give away money fast enough. That's because we have so much to begin with, and we're leasing space in a Methodist church. The point here is that if we decide that we're going to put on our apron, if we decide that we're going to serve, if we in the church decide that the community is the place where ministry is done, then who are we in the church? We are partners that nurture one another. We are partners that equip one another. We don't tell other people we are better than they are, but we find ways to cope and survive and nurture each other so that our experience is one of faith rather than one that drains us. Oh no, we're going to serve those people again. Ugh, I would rather watch golf, right? If you think like that, and I love to play golf, there's this thing called a DVR, and you can record the golf. I'll close by saying that I worked for a time at the Los Angeles Catholic Worker. In East LA, there is a house and then there is a soup kitchen on Skid Row, and you go back and forth between staying in a room at the house, which is also populated by people who need shelter. So it's a big house, an old Victorian house in East LA, and then a soup kitchen that's at 6th and Gladys. And one of my jobs during the time that I was at the Catholic Worker was to check in people's weapons. So I would stand at the line, they would give me a weapon, I would put it in a plastic box, and then I would give them the color card or the number card on that box, and the box went on a cart where everyone could see it. But you were not allowed to go in and eat with a weapon. We'd had a bad experience with that, right? Because people get fidgety or jumpy, somebody doesn't like somebody else, and the shiv comes out, and then we're off to the races. So it was a really helpful rule to have. I developed friendships, believe it or not, with people whose names I did not know simply because I promised to take care of their knife or their gum. What a weird thing, right? That, though, is church. Allowing people to safely gather to eat and then returning them to the life that they are struggling with. I also noticed something really important, that persons who were unsheltered or persons who needed a meal were all different. I thought they were all the same. They had some excuse. They were crappy at holding a job. They had a medical problem that somehow they had ignored taking their medication. But it wasn't the case. Everybody was different, with a different story, obviously with a different name. And it wasn't until I was flying home that I remembered that every one of those persons was a child of God. I just went there to work, to serve, and I was trying to check a box. This is going to look good for me if I serve the poor for 6 months or 8 months. And it did. People are like, ooh, that's cool, you did that, right? But I was there so that I could learn that all of them were the ones that are invited to the wedding feast. It sort of blows my mind putting together a church that would welcome those folks on Skid Row on a Sunday morning, right? That is a lot. But I think that's what we're called to do. The text is really clear. The challenge is complicated. Just because the challenge is complicated, you know from your life, doesn't mean that you get a pass. The work order has still been put in by God. May we have the strength and the intelligence and the creativity and the faith to respond to God's invoice. And together God's people say, Amen.